a man whose ideas changed mathematics forever, but who was considered a dangerous sectarian by his contemporaries. Why was Pythagoras, the founder of the famous theorem, expelled from the city-states? Today we will delve into the mysterious world of his closed community, uncovering secret rituals and forbidden knowledge that shocked ancient Greece. Subscribe to the channel, like the video, and let's get started. Having moved from his native Samos to the prosperous Greek city-state of Croton in southern Italy around 530 BC, Pythagoras was already an elderly man, around 40 years old. He brought with him not only the profound knowledge he had acquired, according to legend in Egypt and Babylon, but also a charisma capable of captivating the aristocratic youth. Imagine a hot afternoon in Croton. The agora, the main square of the city, is bustling with life. Merchants shout out prices for olives and wine. Craftsmen discuss orders. Politicians argue. And amid this hustle and bustle, he appears. A tall, stately man in snow-white clothes, with a piercing gaze. His speeches are unlike ordinary political debates. He speaks of the harmony of the cosmos, the immortality of the soul, and numbers as the sacred language of the gods. For many, his words are a revelation. Soon, a circle of devoted followers gathers around him. But these are not just students coming to lectures. Pythagoras creates something completely new for Hellas. A closed community, a heteria, which historians would later call the Pythagorean Union. It was something between a monastery, a political party, and an academy of sciences. The members of the union lived by strict rules established by the teacher, and shared not only knowledge but also property. Hierarchy and structure. The community had a clear hierarchy. At the top was Pythagoras himself. Autos Epha, he himself said. His word was law and could not be questioned. Below him were the mathematicians, initiates who had been admitted to the deepest secrets of the teaching. And at the very bottom were the acousmatics, novices, listeners who had a long journey of trials ahead of them. Social and political aspect. The Pythagoreans were not hermits. They actively intervened in the political life of Croton and neighboring cities, promoting their aristocratic ideals of rule by the best. This created tension, as democratic sentiments were strong in Magna Graecia. For the ordinary inhabitants of Croton, the Pythagoreans were a mysterious and influential force, a group of people bound by a secret oath and acting as a single entity. This inspired both respect and fear. It was not easy to get into the circle of the chosen ones. Candidates had to go through a rigorous selection process. Pythagoras was said to be a skilled physiognomist and assessed not only the mind, but also character, gait, and manner of laughing. Those whom he considered worthy faced the main test, a hemiphia, a sacred vow of silence. This vow could last from 2 to 5 years. 5 years of silence. 5 years during which the novice, the acousmatikos, could only listen. He attended the teacher's lectures, but sat behind a curtain, unable to see his face. He was forbidden to ask questions, express his opinion, or share his doubts. His task was to absorb acousmata, brief, sometimes enigmatic sayings, such as, "Do not eat your heart," or "Do not walk on the high roads." The purpose of silence. It was not just a test of endurance. Silence served several purposes. First, it taught humility and self-control, weeding out the impatient and proud. Second, it sharpened hearing and perception, forcing one to concentrate on the meaning of what was heard rather than on formulating one's own thoughts. Thirdly, it was a key element in preserving secrecy. The knowledge that was revealed in the union was considered too powerful and dangerous for unprepared minds. Silence was the first barrier to it. A young aristocrat, accustomed to feasts, debates, and public attention, found himself in complete isolation. He saw his comrades, but could not talk to them about the most important things. He heard wisdom, but could not discuss it. Every day was a struggle with himself. Many could not bear it and left the Union. Those who left faced symbolic death. A gravestone was placed for them in the school courtyard, and they ceased to exist for the Brotherhood. But those who passed the test were reborn. They became mathematicians, those who were admitted to secret knowledge, to the face of the teacher, and to the right to speak. At the heart of Pythagoras' teachings lay an idea that sounds strange to modern man, but was revolutionary to the ancient Greeks. Everything is number. The Pythagoreans believed that numbers were not just a tool for counting, but divine entities, the building blocks of the universe. Each number had its own character, its own sacred meaning. 1, monad, the beginning of everything, the deity. 2, dyad, the principle of division, matter, the feminine principle. 3, triad, harmony, the union of masculine and feminine, the first perfect number. 4, justice, the foundation of the material world. 4 elements, 4 seasons. This was not just a philosophical abstraction, but practical knowledge. Musical intervals, the movement of the planets, the proportions of the human body, all of this, according to the Pythagoreans, was subject to mathematical laws. They were the first to establish that harmonious chords, octave, fifth, fourth, correspond to simple numerical ratios of string lengths, 1 to 2, 2 to 3, 3 to 4. Music turned out to be mathematics, and the cosmos, a giant musical instrument producing the harmony of the spheres. The pinnacle of this numerical mysticism was the tetractys, or fourfold. This is a sacred figure, a triangle composed of 10 points. 10 points arranged in 4 rows, 1, 2, 3, 4, symbolized the entire universe. Tetractys contained the 4 elements, musical harmonies, and the structure of the cosmos. The tetractys oath was the most sacred and inviolable for the Pythagoreans. Diogenes Laertius quotes its text, "I swear by the one who put the tetractys, the eternal source and root of nature, into our souls." This knowledge was absolutely secret. Disclosure of the secret of the tetractys or any other element of the teaching was considered the most terrible betrayal. This obsession with numbers and geometry was not like science as we understand it. It was a religion. Discoveries in mathematics were not simply intellectual achievements, but acts of divine revelation, bringing one closer to understanding the Creator's plan. Such syncretism of science and mysticism was not unique. Remember the Egyptian priests, who were both guardians of sacred rituals and astronomers, whose calculations of the movement of celestial bodies determined the entire life of the state. For them, as for the Pythagoreans, knowledge was a power available only to the chosen few. However, the Pythagoreans' numerical mysticism faced an internal crisis that became one of the Brotherhood's most closely guarded secrets. The legend, retold by Iamblichus and other later authors, links this to the discovery of algon, the incommensurable or irrational. For a world where everything had to be expressed through the harmony of whole numbers and their relationships, the existence of a quantity that could not be represented as a fraction was a catastrophe. This number turned out to be the diagonal of a square, with sides equal to 1. According to the theorem that would later be named after Pythagoras, its length is equal to the square root of 2, root 2. This discovery was not just a mathematical problem, but a theological blow. It destroyed the perfect picture of the world, showing that at the very foundation of existence lies chaos, something inexpressible and irrational. This knowledge was considered forbidden. It is said that a Pythagorean named Hippasus of Metapontum either committed sacrilege by revealing this secret to the uninitiated, or came to this discovery himself and shared it with his brothers. According to legend, the gods punished him for this crime. The ship on which he was sailing was wrecked, and the traitor drowned in the sea. The Brotherhood erected a cenotaph, a symbolic tomb, for him as a man expelled from the world of the living and from the world of the Pythagoreans. Although the historicity of this story is disputed, it perfectly reflects the atmosphere of secrecy and fear of knowledge that could shake the foundations of faith. The doctrine of the transmigration of souls, or metempsychosis, was another pillar of Pythagorean doctrine that shocked the Hellenic world. The idea that after death the soul does not go to the gloomy realm of Hades, but can return to earth in the body of another person or even an animal was alien to the Olympian religion. Pythagoras, according to evidence, claimed to remember his past lives. He said that he was once Ephialides, the son of Hermes, and received from his father the gift of remembering everything even after death. Then he was the Trojan warrior Euphorbus, who was killed by Menelaus. Pythagoras allegedly recognized his shield in one of the temples. Later, his soul visited the bodies of Hermodamus and the fisherman Pyrrhus before incarnating in himself. These stories were not just eccentric tales. They served as proof of his divine nature and justification for his ethical system. If the soul is immortal and wanders from body to body, then earthly life is only one stage in a long journey of purification, or catharsis. The goal was to break free from the sorrowful cycle of births, an Orphic term familiar to the Pythagoreans, and return to the divine world. Every action, every thought mattered because it determined who you would become in your next life. Killing an animal for food was equated with killing a potential relative. Hence the strict vegetarianism. This teaching gave rise to a unique view of justice. Punishment for a misdeed was not revenge by the gods, but a natural consequence of your actions that would catch up with you in your next incarnation. Justice, which the Pythagoreans defined as a number multiplied by itself, the square of a number, became a cosmic law of retribution. Such fatalism and personal responsibility for the eternal fate of one's soul was both frightening and attractive. It was a doctrine for the strong-minded, ready to take on the burden of eternity. Food prohibitions, or akusmata, were not just a diet, but a system of ritual taboos, each of which had symbolic meaning. The most famous prohibition, on the consumption of beans, has been subject to many interpretations. Aristotle suggested several reasons. Perhaps because beans cause flatulence and interfere with peaceful contemplation, or because they resemble the gates of Hades, or, as mentioned, because they resemble human embryos. Pliny the Elder wrote that the Pythagoreans believed that the souls of the dead were enclosed in beans. Touching beans was considered desecration. The legend of Pythagoras's death is directly related to this taboo. Fleeing from his pursuers, he ran to a bean field and stopped, preferring death to breaking the prohibition. But there were other rules that were just as strange. Do not eat hearts meant not giving in to consuming emotions such as sadness or envy. Do not stir the fire with a knife meant not provoking an angry person with harsh words. Do not sit on a bread measure, henix, meant do not live idly, think about the future. Do not break bread meant do not destroy friendship. The whole life of a Pythagorean was permeated with these symbolic prescriptions, turning everyday life into a continuous ritual of self-improvement. They rose before dawn, took solitary walks to put their thoughts in order, did gymnastics, and before going to bed, they always conducted self-analysis, asking themselves 3 questions. What did I do wrong? What did I do? What duty did I fail to fulfill? The political influence of the Union in Croton and other cities of Magna Graecia was enormous. The Pythagoreans, mostly from the aristocracy, sought to establish a regime based on their ideas of harmony and order. They believed that the state should be ruled by the best, that is, the wise men who had learned the laws of the cosmos. This was a form of aristocracy of the spirit, which in practice resulted in oligarchic rule. They managed to hold on to power for several decades. The cities under their influence prospered. However, their elitism, secrecy, and contempt for the uninitiated masses bred hatred. Democratically minded citizens saw them as conspirators who had usurped power. One of the leaders of the anti-Pythagorean movement was a certain Cylon, a wealthy and influential Crotonian. According to one version, he wanted to join the union, but Pythagoras refused him because of his bad temper. Insulted, Cylon gathered supporters and began to turn the people against the sect. Tensions peaked around 510 BC. During a meeting of the Pythagoreans at the house of the athlete Milo, who, according to some sources, was their supporter, a crowd incited by Cylon surrounded the building and set it on fire. Many prominent members of the Brotherhood perished in the fire. This tragedy marked the beginning of the end of the Pythagoreans' political dominance. Persecution began. Those who survived were expelled from the cities and their property was confiscated. Pythagoras himself, who was already about 80 years old at the time, was forced to flee. His death in Metapontum, where he had taken refuge, is shrouded in mystery. Whether he died of starvation in the Temple of the Muses or was killed by his persecutors is unknown. Despite the defeat, the teachings survived. The surviving Pythagoreans, such as Philolaus and Archytas of Tarentum, scattered throughout Greece and Italy, continuing to secretly pass on their knowledge. It was thanks to them that Pythagoras' ideas reached Plato, who was deeply impressed by Pythagorean philosophy. Plato's teachings on ideas, the immortality of the soul, and a state ruled by philosophers bear the clear imprint of Pythagoreanism. Thus, through his disciples and followers, the exiled sectarian laid the foundation for all Western idealistic philosophy. The secrecy of the teachings was not just a whim, but a vital necessity. The Pythagoreans believed that knowledge is power, which, in the hands of an ignorant or evil person, can cause enormous harm. Therefore, they divided their teachings into exoteric for outsiders and esoteric for the inner circle. The exoteric part consisted of simple moral precepts and allegories. The esoteric part included complex cosmology, mathematics, and theology. Even the famous theorem on the ratio of the sides of a right-angled triangle was probably part of this secret knowledge, demonstrating the harmony of the world. Although the theorem itself was known in Babylon and Egypt long before Pythagoras, it was the Pythagoreans who were most likely the first to provide a rigorous logical proof for it. Legend has it that in honor of this discovery, Pythagoras sacrificed a hecatomb, 100 bulls, to the gods. This story, however, contradicts their vegetarian principles and is probably a later invention designed to emphasize the significance of the event. The golden verses, attributed to Pythagoras but probably composed by his later followers, represent the quintessence of his ethical teachings. This is not just a collection of rules, but a step-by-step guide to the deification of man. The verses begin with a call to honor the immortal gods and heroes, then move on to respect for parents and loved ones. They teach self-control, moderation in eating and drinking, and the need for daily self-analysis. The ultimate goal, proclaimed in the last lines, is to become an immortal, imperishable God by overcoming the chain of rebirth. This path was not accessible to everyone, but only to those who were ready to devote their lives to strict asceticism and intellectual pursuit. This is what made Pythagoreanism both attractive and repulsive to those around them. It offered salvation, but at the cost of complete submission and renunciation of the familiar world. In addition to Croton, Pythagorean communities, like secret cells, spread to other cities of Magna Graecia, Sybaris, Metapontum, Tarentum. Their structure resembled the Masonic lodges of the future. A strict hierarchy, initiation rituals, a system of passwords and identification marks. One such sign was the pentagram, a 5-pointed star. For the Pythagoreans, it was a symbol of health, Hygeia, the goddess of health, and mathematical perfection. Each of the 5 rays of the star was an isosceles triangle, and inside the star itself a new pentagon was formed, into which a new pentagram could be inscribed, and so on ad infinitum. This mesmerizing property, leading into infinity, demonstrated the divine nature of geometry. Moreover, the intersection of the lines in the pentagram created segments that corresponded to each other in the golden ratio, another secret key to the harmony of the universe. If a member of the Brotherhood found himself in trouble in a foreign city, he could draw this symbol, and any Pythagorean who saw it was obliged to come to his aid. Pythagoras' influence was so great that he acted not only as a teacher, but also as a legislator. Ancient authors such as Iamblichus report that he gave laws to Italian cities, seeking to create an ideal state ruled by wise men. These laws were imbued with his philosophy. They demanded respect for elders, moderation, fidelity in marriage, and, most importantly, obedience to the established order. The Pythagorean model of society was strictly aristocratic. They believed that just as in the cosmos, the planets obey the central fire, and in the musical scale the sounds obey the fundamental tone, so in the polis the common people must unquestioningly obey the rule of wise aristocrats. For them, democracy was synonymous with chaos, disharmony, and the triumph of ignorant passions over reason. This irreconcilable political position was a time bomb that ultimately blew up their world. Friendship, philia, occupied a special place in their teachings. It was considered the highest virtue and was practiced within the Brotherhood with almost religious fervor. There is a well-known story about 2 Pythagoreans, Damon and Phintius. When Dionysius, the tyrant of Syracuse, sentenced Phintius to death, he asked to be allowed to go home to settle his affairs, offering his friend Damon as a pledge. If Phintius did not return, Damon would be executed. Dionysius, struck by this idea, agreed. When the appointed hour was approaching and Phintius still had not returned, Damon calmly prepared for death, not doubting his friend's loyalty. But at the last moment, Phintius appeared. Shocked by their devotion, the tyrant canceled the execution and asked to be accepted as the 3rd member of their union, wishing to join such an incredible friendship. This story, which has become a classic, illustrates the ideal of Pythagorean friendship: complete trust and willingness to sacrifice one's life for a comrade. For them, friendship was the practical embodiment of cosmic harmony on a human level. The inner life of the community was strictly regulated. The day began with joint meditations and intellectual exercises. This was followed by classes in the sciences, arithmetic, geometry, astronomy, and music. These 4 disciplines constituted the quadrivium, the basis of Pythagorean education. They believed that studying these sciences purified the soul, detaching it from the material world and bringing it closer to the divine. The afternoon was reserved for joint walks and conversations, and the evening ended with ritual libations and the reading of sacred texts. Music therapy played an important role. Before going to sleep, the Pythagoreans listened to soothing melodies played on the lyre to clear their minds of the day's worries and prepare their souls for journeys in their dreams. In the morning, they were awakened by invigorating hymns that set them up for active activity. They believed that the right music could heal not only mental but also physical ailments, restoring the disturbed harmony in the body. Women, which was absolutely atypical for Hellas at that time, could be full members of the union. Pythagoras' wife, Theano, was herself an outstanding philosopher and mathematician. After her husband's death, according to some sources, she took over the school together with her daughters. This shows that for the Pythagoreans it was not gender that was important, but intellectual and spiritual qualities. They believed that the soul has no gender, and that women are just as capable of knowing the truth as men. This equality, however, only applied to the inner, esoteric life of the community. In public life, they adhered to traditional views on the role of women as guardians of the hearth. The defeat at Croton did not destroy Pythagoreanism, but forced it underground. The surviving members of the Brotherhood became wandering sages, spreading their teachings throughout the Greek world. One of the most famous Pythagoreans of the post-generational period was Archytas of Tarentum, who lived in the 4th century BC. He was not only a philosopher, but also an outstanding engineer. He is credited with inventing the screw and a mechanical pigeon capable of flying, as well as a successful military leader and politician, elected 7 times as strategist of Tarentum. Archytas was a close friend of Plato and is believed to have had a huge influence on him, introducing him to the depths of Pythagorean mathematics and cosmology. It was through people like Archytas that the secret teachings born in the closed community of Croton penetrated the Athenian academies and became part of the world's philosophical heritage. And yet, the shadow of sectarianism haunted them. Aristotle, writing a century and a half after Pythagoras, spoke of the Pythagoreans with a certain degree of skepticism, noting that their philosophy was more like mysticism than science. He criticized them for not deriving their theories from observations, but rather trying to fit reality into their pre-established numerical schemes. For example, having discovered that there were only 9 celestial bodies known to them, the sun, moon, earth, and 5 planets, rather than the sacred number 10, they simply invented a 10th body, the anti-earth, Antichthon, invisible from Earth as it is always on the opposite side of the central fire. This story perfectly illustrates the difference between their approach and modern science. For them, the harmony and mathematical beauty of the theory were more important than empirical confirmation. The image of Pythagoras himself became increasingly mythologized over time. He came to be called the son of Apollo. Legends were told about his miracles. How he pacified an enraged bear with a single word, making her swear never to attack people again. How he was seen simultaneously in 2 different cities, Croton and Metapontum. How fishermen, at his request, pulled in their nets and released their entire catch alive, and not a single fish died while it was being counted. The most famous legend is about his golden thigh, which he allegedly demonstrated at the Olympic Games as proof of his divine nature. These myths, created by reverent followers, blurred the line between man and God, turning the philosopher into a messiah, the founder of a new religion. It was this deification of the teacher that became one of the reasons for the hatred of his followers. For the traditional Greek polis, where religion was a public affair and the pantheon of gods was universally accepted, the creation of a closed cult around a living or recently deceased person was a challenge to all established norms. The Pythagoreans did not simply engage in philosophy. They offered an alternative path to salvation, their own ethics and their own theology. They created a state within a state, with its own laws, leaders, and secrets. And when this internal state attempted to subjugate the external state, an explosion occurred. The story of Pythagoras and his alliance is the eternal drama of the clash between a charismatic genius bringing new knowledge and an inert and suspicious society that is not ready to accept this knowledge, especially when it requires abandoning familiar ways of life and thinking. It is the tragedy of a prophet who is first exalted and then expelled, leaving behind only legends and ideas that change the world after his death. Pythagoras has gone down in history as a genius whose mathematical ideas have survived the centuries, but his life is a warning about how secret knowledge and secrecy can lead to expulsion. His community, which combined science and sectarianism, shows the fine line between innovation and heresy. That's all for now. Subscribe to the channel, like the video, and see you next time.